What if everything you've ever heard about Buddhism is wrong? Not slightly wrong, completely inverted. What if the man who sat under a tree 2,500 years ago and discovered something radical, something that could shake the foundations of every religion, every government, every power structure on earth, what if that message was so dangerous that it had to be buried? Not by enemies, not by critics, by his own followers. Here's what most people believe. Buddhism is a peaceful religion. Monks in orange robes, incense smoke, statues of a smiling, chubby figure, prayers, rituals, temples. Calm, beautiful, safe. But that image, that's not what Siddhartha Gautama taught. That image was built slowly, over centuries, by people who had everything to gain from softening his message. Because Buddha's original teaching wasn't about rituals. It wasn't about gods. It wasn't about blind devotion. It was about something far more radical. It was about waking up and seeing through every story, every authority, every illusion that the world feeds you. And in this video, you're going to discover exactly how that message was replaced, step by step, and what the original teaching actually was. Let's go back. Around 500 BCE, in what is now Nepal, a prince named Siddhartha Gautama walked away from everything. He wasn't searching for a new religion. He wasn't trying to build a following. He was trying to answer one question. Why do human beings suffer? He spent 6 years studying under the greatest spiritual masters of his time. He starved himself. He meditated for days without sleep. He pushed his body to the edge. And then one day, under a bodhi tree, something broke open inside him. He didn't see God. He didn't receive a holy book. He didn't hear a divine voice. He simply saw clearly. And what he saw was this: suffering doesn't come from outside you. It doesn't come from sin. It doesn't come from an angry God or a broken world. It comes from attachment, from clinging, from the desperate need to make permanent what is fundamentally impermanent. That was the discovery. Simple, clean, radical. He called it the Dharma, the truth of how things actually are. And for the next 45 years, he walked from village to village, teaching this truth to farmers, kings, merchants, and outcasts alike. No temples required, no priests required, no rituals required. Just see clearly and you're free. Now here's where things get interesting. Within 100 years of Buddha's death, the disagreements began. His followers couldn't agree on what he actually said. You see, Buddha never wrote anything down, not a single word. Everything was passed orally, memorized, recited, passed from teacher to student. And oral traditions drift. The first Buddhist council met shortly after his death to preserve his teachings. Then came the second council, and by this point, there were already factions forming, groups arguing over rules, interpretations, practices. By the third council, held under Emperor Ashoka around 250 BCE, Buddhism had already split into at least 18 different schools. 18 schools, each claiming to have the authentic version of what Buddha said. But here's the twist that almost nobody talks about. Emperor Ashoka, the man who did more than anyone in history to spread Buddhism, was also the man who, unintentionally, began transforming it into something Buddha would barely recognize. Ashoka converted to Buddhism after a bloody war left him devastated. He was moved. He changed. He began promoting Buddhist values across his empire. But he did something else too. He institutionalized it. He built monasteries. He funded monks. He made Buddhism an official state religion. And the moment any spiritual movement becomes a state religion, something invisible but catastrophic happens. It stops being about inner awakening, and it starts being about social order. Let's slow down here, because this is the heart of everything. There are two completely different versions of what Buddhism became after the Buddha died. The first is called Theravada, the teaching of the elders. It's the older school. It focuses on personal liberation, individual practice, meditation, mindfulness, the monk's path. It preserved much of the original structure of the Buddha's teaching. But even here, something shifted. In the original teaching, Buddha said, "Do not accept anything simply because it is tradition, because it is written in scriptures, because your teacher said so. Test it yourself. If it leads to suffering, abandon it. If it leads to freedom, embrace it." This is called the Kalama Sutta. It's one of the most radical statements in all of religious history. He was essentially saying, don't believe me either, check it yourself. But Theravada over centuries became increasingly rule-bound. There are over 200 rules for monks, rituals, hierarchies, the idea that only monks, and specifically male monks, could reach enlightenment. The radical egalitarianism of the original teaching, where a woman, a poor farmer, a social outcast could wake up just as easily as a prince, began to fade. Then came the second major development, Mahayana Buddhism, the greater vehicle. Mahayana emerged around the 1st century CE, and it introduced something entirely new. The Bodhisattva ideal, beings of infinite compassion, who delay their own enlightenment to save all sentient beings. Beautiful idea, deeply compassionate. But Mahayana also brought something else, celestial Buddhas, divine figures, prayers to supernatural beings for blessings, protection, and salvation. Suddenly, Buddhism started to look a lot like the very thing Buddha had walked away from. Buddhism had begun in direct rebellion against the Vedic religious system of ancient India, a system full of gods, priests, rituals, and the idea that only certain castes could access spiritual truth. And now, slowly, Buddhism was rebuilding those same structures under different names. Then came Vajrayana, Tantric Buddhism, which spread into Tibet and became what most people picture when they think of Tibetan Buddhism today. Complex rituals, sacred objects, elaborate mandalas, hierarchies of lamas, the idea that the Dalai Lama is a literal reincarnation of a divine being. Now, none of this is inherently wrong. These traditions have produced profound teachers and genuine wisdom. But they are different from what Siddhartha Gautama taught under that tree. Radically, fundamentally different. And the question is, why did this happen? Here's the cold, uncomfortable answer. The original teaching is hard to sell. Sit quietly, observe your mind, see through your attachments. Don't cling to anything, not even to the idea of a self. That doesn't build temples. That doesn't fill monasteries. That doesn't attract emperors or political power. But pray to this divine figure and your suffering will end. That works. That scales. That builds institutions. And institutions need to survive. They need money. They need followers. They need to be useful to the people in power. The Buddha's real message, the one that said your liberation depends on no one but you, is the most dangerous idea in the history of religion. Because it makes every priest, every temple, every religious authority optional. But here's the question that's been nagging at me, and maybe it's nagging at you too. If the original message was so clear, why didn't someone preserve it? Here's the uncomfortable answer: someone did. And they've been largely ignored. There is a tradition within Buddhism so old, so stripped down, so close to the original teaching, that mainstream Buddhist institutions have sometimes actively worked to suppress it. It's called Zen in Japan, Chan in China, Dhyana in its original Sanskrit form. And its origin story is almost shockingly direct. The legend says that one day, the Buddha stood before a large crowd. Everyone expected a sermon. Instead, he held up a flower. He said nothing. The entire crowd sat in confused silence. And then one monk, Mahayana, simply smiled. That was it. That was the transmission. No words, no scripture, no doctrine. The Buddha is said to have told Mahayana, "I have given everyone else the teaching. To you, I give the teaching beyond teaching." Direct transmission, mind to mind, no institution required. Zen became the tradition that kept pointing back to this. "Don't worship me," Zen masters would say. "Don't cling to my words. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." That last line, one of the most famous in Zen, sounds violent. It isn't. It means, if you're clinging to an idea of Buddha as a divine savior outside yourself, you're doing it wrong. That idol has to die. What remains is the truth he was pointing at. But here's what makes this even deeper. Zen itself, the tradition that tried hardest to preserve the original spirit, also got institutionalized. There are Zen hierarchies, Zen monasteries, Zen certificates of enlightenment. The water always finds a way to get muddy. So does that mean the original teaching is simply lost? Not exactly. Here's what I think is the most important realization from all of this. The Buddha's message wasn't replaced because people were evil or conspiratorial. It was replaced because of something deeply, unavoidably human. We are pattern-seeking creatures. We crave stories with heroes and villains, with divine forces working on our behalf, with rituals that make us feel connected to something larger. We crave certainty. And the Buddha's original teaching offers the opposite of certainty. It says everything is impermanent. Everything you're clinging to, including your idea of yourself, is a construction. And peace comes not from finding the right permanent thing to hold on to, but from releasing the grip entirely. That is not a comfortable message. It doesn't give you a God to pray to. It doesn't give you a heaven to look forward to. It doesn't give you an identity to wear like armor. It says sit still, look clearly, watch how you suffer, watch how you create that suffering. And in that watching, without judgment, without escape, something quietly dissolves. That's it. No temple required, no priest required, no membership required. And every time that message has come close to reaching large numbers of people, something has happened. Institutions form, hierarchies emerge. The simple, devastating, liberating truth gets wrapped in ritual, protected by authority, and quietly smothered in beautiful cloth. Not because the teachers were corrupt, but because humans at scale need structure. The tragedy isn't that Buddhism got complicated. The tragedy is what we lost in the complexity. We lost the most empowering idea the Buddha ever taught. You are not broken. You are not fallen. You do not need to be saved by anyone. You need to wake up. Those are completely different propositions. One keeps you dependent. One sets you permanently free. Think about the world you live in right now. The news cycle designed to keep you afraid. The systems designed to keep you consuming. The narratives designed to keep you looking outward for salvation, to the right leader, the right religion, the right product, the right identity. All of it runs on the same fuel, the belief that you are incomplete and that something outside you will complete you. That is precisely what the Buddha saw through. That is precisely the illusion he was pointing at. And 2,500 years later, his real message is still dangerous. Not because it promotes violence, not because it challenges governments, but because it challenges the most deeply held belief any human being has. The belief that you need to be different than you already are. The Zen masters used to say, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Nothing changes on the outside. Everything changes on the inside. That's the message that was buried. Not in a tomb, not in a secret text, not in a hidden tradition. It was buried in complexity, in ritual, in the very reverence his followers showed him. The man who said, test everything, trust nothing blindly, find out for yourself, became an idol. The ultimate irony. And maybe, just maybe, The fact that you're sitting here, questioning what you've been told, refusing to accept the comfortable version of things. Maybe that's closer to what he was actually teaching than anything else. The question was never, what did Buddha say? The question was always, what do you see when you look clearly?